Welcome back, Sooner Nation. Today we got to talk about some things that are being discussed around the college football world around Oklahoma. Their over/under win total, and specifically adding on to what Josh Pate talked about with the value of Oklahoma or the value of Brent Venables at Oklahoma. And before we dive into it, guys, I need to hear from y'all. So make sure you're joining the discussion and jumping down in the comments below, giving me your thoughts. And if you haven't already, you need to just make sure you hit that like and you hit the subscribe button. Thank you for tuning in to the PG Show, where we talk about all things Oklahoma athletics. But again, today we're going to talk about Oklahoma football because the Oklahoma over/under win total was set at 7.5. And a lot of Oklahoma fans have kind of looked around the room and said, where in the world did this total come from? And when you look at some of the other SEC totals, you kind of wonder how Oklahoma could literally be just the middle of the pack. And I look at it this way because Jay over at Unfair Sports presented this in such a great way. And we're going to kind of piggyback a little bit off what he was able to bring up. But I think total, you have to look at the SP Plus rankings presented by Bill Connolly in the SEC podcast at where Oklahoma is in terms of returning production overall on both sides of the ball, returning 62% of its players, coming in at number 9 in the SEC, where there are 16 teams. Now, when you look at it a little bit more in depth, on defense, Oklahoma is returning 79% of their production on defense. And most notably, you're looking at Billy Bowman back there in the safety room, and you're looking at Danny Stutzman in the linebacker room, two guys who arguably should have been up for awards. And quite honestly, when you look at Oklahoma's season last year and you look at the impact of missing Danny Stutzman in some of those games, the Oklahoma State game, the Kansas game, due to injuries, you used to look at it and say, if Danny Stutzman's healthy, Oklahoma probably has a good chance to win both of those games. And the defense probably looks a lot better than what it did at the end of the season. And then you look at the offensive returning production. And obviously, Oklahoma here is ranked dead last, returning 44% of their production, coming in at 16. And you look at it, it's okay, well, you got Jackson Arnold, the 5-star quarterback, returning. And I think there's really high hopes for what Jackson Arnold is going to be able to bring to this team, especially with the returning wide receivers that he's gotten. Nick Anderson, who has been snubbed so far off a lot of lists where they talk about some of the top returning wide receivers in college football. You got Jaden Gibson, Jalil Farouk, but not to mention you're bringing in guys like Ivan Carrion. You've got guys like Zion Kearney, Jacquez Petaway. Brennan Thompson was a guy last year for Oklahoma that just absolutely, you could tell, is going to be a weapon. And then you got Andrell Anthony, a guy who got hurt in the Texas game, was Oklahoma's leading wide receiver. There's a lot of Oklahoma fans who have high expectations for Andrell Anthony to be that leading wide receiver for Oklahoma once again. So although Oklahoma, in terms of returning production, is not at the top of this list, I think there's some still high optimism that although you're turning over your offensive coordinator and you're replacing 5 starters on the offensive line, which I know some of you will argue, hey, Sexton was a starter for a portion of the year. Obviously, you still have Troy Everett and Joshua Bates still on this team, and one of those guys can play the center position. So it's not like you're replacing 5 brand new guys. You still have a base that you can go off of. At the end of the day, you lost Tyler Guyton and Andrew Rain and McCabe Matower, right? Walter Rout. Like, you lost significant pieces on that offensive line. And although Jacob Sexton did start some of the games, he was not your key starter all year long. Caden Green going to Missouri hurts as well. And so you look at the SP Plus rankings, and now you kind of understand why the 7.5 total's there. But now I kind of want to shift a little bit into kind of adding on to what Josh Pate was talking about the other day, and what is the value that Brent Venables brings to Oklahoma, right? Because in his first season, he went 6-7. And I think you have to look at that 6-7 season and say, well, why? Because he had to strip the team down to the studs. He had to start over. And that was hard. Like, that was probably a hard thing to do, especially knowing that you're going to leave a place in Clemson where you have elite defensive guys that some of them would have followed you to Oklahoma, but because you said, no, you're going to stick it out at Clemson, you're not going to follow me here, it made it harder. It made the job harder, especially when your previous coach in Lincoln Riley did not recruit the defensive side of the ball well. And then you look at what BV has been able to do on the recruiting trail, right? In 2022, he was the number 8 ranking class. 2023, number 5. 2024, number 8. He's had 2 5-star defensive linemen, 1 5-star safety, and 1 5-star quarterback since he's gotten to Oklahoma. And a lot of people would have told you in the post-Lincoln Riley era, maybe Oklahoma doesn't get those elite quarterbacks that Lincoln Riley was getting. They did it 1 year absent of Lincoln Riley. And then they turn around and recruit 3 5-star defensive line or 3 5-star defensive players who Lincoln Riley was not able to do at his career, at his time at Oklahoma. Now, Lincoln Riley in his time, 21 top 100 players, a total of 4 5-stars. I just want you to mention that. 4 total 5-stars. Literally, Brent Venables has done that in his 3 seasons. And Lincoln Riley was here, 5, 6 seasons as a head coach? Number 8, number 9, number 6, number 13, and number 10 overall recruiting classes for Lincoln Riley. Obviously, you saw those classes tailor off. And now I look at it and say, well, in 2022, he might have had a top 10 class. I mean, when you look at some of the guys that were tailored to be there, Luther Burden, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, you have the Shretton brothers. Like, Oklahoma in 2022 was going to have a pretty elite class. It just fell apart when Lincoln Riley left. But Brent Venables was able to, in National Signing Day, really come in with some big signing day flips and big time signings. Now, I want to get back to the 7.5 total here and also talking about the value of BV and what he is bringing to Oklahoma and why Oklahoma fans really have to be excited for their future at the SEC. So you get that 7.5. Well, that's because your first season was 6-7. Your second year was a 10-3. So as Josh Pate said, you stabilized the program. But a lot of the odd makers only have 2 seasons to go off of. Do they really know who Brent Venables is? And unless you're entrenched and you're looking at the program from an Oklahoma fan standpoint, right? You know, you're looking at it as a, hey, like, we follow this program every day. We know what's going on. Then I don't think you necessarily get it, right? Here's what I mean by that. Culture. This was one of the biggest things that BV was able to bring to Oklahoma and change that I think is making the biggest impact. He came in and addressed the discipline issues that Oklahoma had and how the team should simply operate day to day, right? Getting in the film room, watching film. How should you watch film? How should you dissect that? Being active in your community. These players are active in the community, active with the school body. Like, they're not hidden like some superstars behind a wall that is not able to be accessed by everybody else. He wants them to be leaders in their community. He wants them to be leaders amongst the school. Then you see the school being a priority, graduating with a degree. And we know BV has been big on this. Stoops was big on it as well. But looking at life after football, and when you look at how he has changed the culture of this program, then you see how that's playing out on the field. Hence why he was able to turn the program around with 4 more wins this past season, right? He allows former players to come in and be active in the program, whether it's in recruiting or on the field for practices or just to be around, right? I think that's so important. BV has really embraced the family aspect of Oklahoma, and changing the culture has absolutely changed the value of what Oklahoma football is. Because when you talk to recruits on the recruiting trail, 90% of the time they're going to tell you family, culture, soul mission. Those are the words you hear from the recruits and why Oklahoma is a big deal for them. And so when you look at, is BV being an undervalued head coach at this point in time? 100%. I don't think people are putting enough stock into what he has done at Oklahoma, especially on the recruiting side of things. Because yes, Lincoln Riley landed top 10 classes. But when you go look at what those classes consisted of, it consisted of guys that were mainly tailored to the offensive side of the ball. When you look at what they were doing from a conditioning and strength point of view, Jerry Smith was not there after, I think, like 2018. I think he went to end up going to Texas A&M. And it really showed when BV got here and Jerry Schmidt got here, they had to revamp. And a lot of those guys, they weren't ready for Jerry Schmidt. Now, you're heading into the third year of BV, and you're going to get the true Brent Venables at this point, a guy who wants to get on the recruiting trail and recruit 25 guys a class. And you have a whole class sitting in the wings for an entire year, learning the system, learning what it's like to be a part of a college football program, so that when they hit their redshirt freshman year or sophomore year, they are ready to play. They are ready to be implemented as starters. You got a lot of guys now in this program that are 3, 4, and second-year starters, and mostly 3-year starters in the BV program. This is going to be an elite team this year. The question is, on the offensive side of the ball, is Brent Venables and Seth Luttrell, are they going to be able to get this team at the offensive level that we've seen Oklahoma for the past, 10 years? That's the real question. But if you ask me today, is Brent Venables being undervalued? 100%. I think Brent Venables is a coach that I think is going to be a top-tier SEC coach when it's all said and done. And Bud Elliott said something interesting on their podcast, on the Cover 3 podcast. He said it was a red flag that Oklahoma didn't make the Big 12 championship game in a weak conference this year. And I don't think so, because you look at how Oklahoma has improved on defense and how they've improved on the recruiting trail and how they want to operate this program. I don't know how you can say it's a red flag. Texas was a great program. They should have made the Big 12 championship game. A lot of us were not calling for Oklahoma to make the Big 12 championship game. Now, if this was Brent Venables' third or fourth year and he had this thing rolling and they didn't make the Big 12 championship game, maybe that's a topic of conversation for another day. But as of right now, I think it's not a red flag that Oklahoma didn't make it. In fact, Oklahoma winning 10 games was above most people's predictions. A lot of people had Oklahoma winning 9 games this year. A lot of people did. Oklahoma going out there and winning 10 and going to the Alamo Bowl, that was pretty good for a lot of Oklahoma fans. And I think you're excited about the future of Oklahoma football. Maybe I eat these words here in a couple of years. But as of right now, I just don't see the red flags that Bud Elliott sees. So, guys, I need to hear from y'all. Make sure you do me a favor. Hit that like. Hit the subscribe button. Join the discussion. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are around how BV is turning around Oklahoma, where he has the direction of this program at. And YouTube wants you guys to watch one of these videos right here. So make sure